Have I sufficiently confused you? Good. Let's get back to some of the history for a little bit, shall we? Now, Russian choir sort of remained in the churches, and of course, it evolved and grew, but it largely remained inside the churches and just inside the churches, nowhere else. That changed, however, as Russian society began to open up. Now, Russia was a feudal society for a very long time. In fact, it was one of the last countries in the world to abolish serfdom. But in 1816, 17, and 19, countries near Russia began to abolish serfdom, such as Iceland, Portland, and so on. And that began to put a little bit of pressure on the Russians. Serfs began to ask, sort of, why are we still serfs? Why aren't we freed like some of these other countries? And eventually, that sort of the pressure accumulated in 1861 when, under the leadership of Tsar Alexander II, the serfs were finally free and Russia abolished serfdom. Now, this opened up Russian society a little bit. And at this time, Russian society was absolutely by no means open and free. However, it did give Russians a little bit of a change of pace, if you will, and allowed two very big composers to get their feet in the door and modernize both Russian music and Russian choir. The first composer was a fellow by the name of Tchaikovsky, and the second was a fellow by the name of Rachmaninoff. Now, Tchaikovsky and Rachmaninoff were kind of like the Mozart and Beethoven of the East, if you will allow the fact that Mozart and Beethoven really revolutionized Western music, then Tchaikovsky and Rachmaninoff really revolutionized Eastern music in the same sense. And while neither of these two men really wrote any lyrics for choirs for their songs, we can debate Rachmaninoff a little bit. They were mostly composers, composing the sort of piano music for their symphonies and their overtures and that sort of deal. But what their music allowed for was Russian music to have a new backdrop. Russian music was now moving out of the churches and into the theaters because of the work that these two men did. And of course, the choirs followed the music out of the churches as well. And this really allowed for a popularization of Russian choir and let the mass movement of people begin to come to theaters and enjoy it in a different light. No longer were Russian choirs simply singing hymns and songs about God in a church setting, but they were singing it in an entertainment setting, in an enjoyment setting, and it breathed new life into something that was already a very strong force in Russian culture. Take Tchaikovsky's famous 1812 overture, which has been popularized in my generation by the movie V for Vendetta. However, this song was not created to mark the defeat of an evil British dictatorship. It was to mark the defeat of Napoleon's Grand Army in his invasion of Russia. And Tchaikovsky was asked to create a grand commemorative piece to be used in the 25th coronation of Tsar Alexander II. And he wrote this piece in 1818, and it was not intended to be used by choirs. However, there are plenty of choir renditions of the song. Observe. Rachmaninoff also helped to influence and evolve the ever-growing Russian choir scene at this time. In fact, he wrote and composed the Russian version of Ave Maria, which is considered to be one of his greatest works. That's why I said earlier it was debatable on whether or not he wrote music for Russian choirs. However, most of his music are piano compositions, but you can still find Russian choir renditions of them. He just didn't write any lyrics for those choirs. Rachmaninoff was a thoroughly modern composer whose piano compositions were said to be several decades ahead of his time by several scholars. It is undoubtable that these Romantic era composers changed the face of Russian choir. Without their influence and without their music, it is possible that choir remains part of the church forever and is solely relegated to an arm of church tradition. But in this move to the theaters, it took on a whole new form and a whole new meaning. Now you no longer went to church just to hear choir music. Now choir music was something that on your day off you took your friends to the theater to enjoy. And without this opening of the door and allowing for this evolution of Russian choir music, I do not believe that it would have played the vital and important role that it would play in our next and final segment of this video, Russian choir during the Russian Revolution and World War II.